Well, we're back into our look at cults and the occult, and we're going to transition from the various cults of the West. We have been looking at over a number of lessons thus far, and we're going to transition from those cults to the cults in the East. Now, over the past century or so, Eastern religions have penetrated much more into the West, much more than ever before. Now, whereas the cults of the West, to a certain extent, would draw their doctrine, I guess you could say, from the Bible. Now, what they would do, of course, is take the Bible and they would twist it and distort it and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, the cults of the West usually draw their doctrines from the Word of God, whereas the Eastern religions could care less about the Bible. The cult that we are going to begin, a two-part look at, starting with this lesson, is the cult of Hinduism. Hinduism. Now, Hinduism, I will readily admit, I'm going to be giving some names and some words that I'm simply not used to. I will probably be mispronouncing them, even though I don't really want to, so I apologize in advance. But Hinduism can be traced back before even the time of Israel's exodus from Egypt. Whereas we have seen in our studies the cults of the West, where you can usually trace them back to an individual founder, like Mormonism, Joseph Smith, or Mary Baker Eddy, or L. Ron Hubbard, or Rutherford Russell, and so on and so forth. But as far as Hinduism goes, it doesn't seem as it can be traced back to one individual founder. Religious scholars would say that Hinduism can be divided into four different periods. The first period going all the way back to 3,000 years before the Common Era. The last one, the fourth one, really in its development, started about the 2nd century or so before the Common Era and wound up really finishing off in the 2nd century of this Common Era, about a 400-year period. This is taken from the Encyclopedic Dictionary. I've quoted from that numerous times. And the authors write, Hinduism and its counterpart, Buddhism, went on to make a tremendous impact in Asia, while Christianity transformed the West. In the 4th through the 8th centuries AD, a popularization of Hinduism took place in the writings known as the Puranas. They comprise an anthology of Hindu literature summarizing the three gods of the Hindu Trinity, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, as well as all of the major ideas of the religion. The Puranas became the text of the common people. The first centuries AD also saw the development of a multiplicity of cults and sects, exalting various deities, including Shakti, the mother goddess, Skanda, the son of Shiva, Surya, the sun god, Lakshmi, goddess of fortune and consort of Vishnu, and hundreds of others. The paradox of Hinduism was its ability to adapt itself to a mass polytheism, while simultaneously advancing monotheistic tendencies. During the latter part of the first millennium AD, a time equivalent to the beginning of Europe's Middle Ages, a spirit of antagonism against Buddhism arose among prominent Hindu philosophers, particularly Shankara and Kumarila. Reports of the destruction of Buddhist temples and the murder of monks were becoming more commonplace after the 7th century. Hinduism found itself threatened by Muslim invasions beginning in the 11th century. Occupation of northern India resulted in the strengthening of Hinduism in the south. Islam failed to influence the theology of Hinduism, but did have an effect on language and culture. Many Arabic and Persian words wove their way into Indian vocabulary. The practice of secluding women from upper classes, or the purdah, was concomitant with Islamic doctrine. End quote. So, as you can see, this particular cult goes back several thousand years. And then it went through, you could say, a renaissance, if you would, here in the West. All really perpetrated by one individual, very well-known individual. The man's name, of course, Mahatma Gandhi. And it was through Gandhi that really started what you would say a number of social reforms and started a social reform movement. It was Gandhi who stressed nonviolence. It was Gandhi who stressed egalitarianism between the sexes. And it was Gandhi and his work that really wound up inspiring another individual here in the West. A man who would also lead a social reform movement. And that man, of course, was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So Hindu theology, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it, because be totally honest with you, you could get lost in the weeds. But Hindu theology is divided into 6 systems or schools of thought, with all having similar goals. Now, they have similar goals, but a different orientation through which to achieve these goals. As I had mentioned earlier, there is no one individual text. There are a number of books and writings that they would call scriptures, but unlike what we would see in Christianity and our faith and walk, where we look to the Bible is the authority and there is no other authority, Hinduism can't really say that. So there are a number of different writings. One of them, of course, is called the Veda, which apparently goes back to 1,000 years before the Common Era. The Upanishads, I think it's called the Bhagavad Gita. That's another of the more famous writings. And then there are a number of other ones as well. So they all comprise really Hindu theology. And there are really a multiplicity of different avenues that you can take if you were to find yourself enamored with Hinduism. In regards to God, and I'm going to spend the rest of this lesson just really focusing on God, the God that we know, and how Hinduism views God. And then I'm going to address Yeshua the Messiah, commonly referred to as Jesus Christ, and how Hinduism looks at him. And that'll be the conclusion of this lesson. As far as God is concerned, Hinduism would say that God is, quote unquote, the absolute. The absolute. That God is a universal spirit. That everyone is a part of God, or the Brahma. Now, most people worship manifestations of Brahma. They would worship like the gods and the goddesses, and don't even know it. But Hindu theology is that God really is manifested in all creation, whether it be animate, whether it be inanimate. And really, when you think about it, it goes along the lines, if it sounds familiar to you, it goes along the lines of Kabbalah. The thought in Kabbalah is there is God, or the Ein Sof. And so the Ein Sof is this unapproachable, unknowable God. That's in Kabbalah, this Ein Sof. And so this unknowable, unapproachable God created God. And then Hashem, that God, created the heavens and the earth. So the God that you know of in the Bible, that's not really God. There is another God above him. And really, Hinduism says the same thing for the most part. You have God, and then you have this multiplicity of gods and goddesses. But Hinduism adheres both to monotheism and monism, in that all of reality proceeds from this one essence. Yet it is also polytheistic, in that it advocates worshiping many lesser deities. This one essence is expressed pluralistically in the material universe. For this reason, Hinduism also adheres to pantheism. The individual self-expression of Brahma is each being is called the Atman. The ultimate goal or quest of all religion, according to Hinduism, is to identify Atman with Brahma. So they would say pantheism, of course, it's God is in everything. So we are all in God, and God is everywhere. So God is in the trees, and God is in the grass, and God is in the animals and the worms and the bugs and in us, and we're all a part of the part of the earth, and we're all a part of God. And then, but of course, you have that's the monotheistic avenue, you could say, of Hinduism, but at the same time, they stress all of these gods and goddesses. So it's monotheistic, but it's also a plurality as well, or polytheistic. You have the Indian expression, very well known in Hinduism, quote, Brahman is one and there is no second. Now that sounds very, very much like, of course, the Shema. Deuteronomy 6:4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Brahma is one, and there is no second. The Hindu conceives Brahma not as a separate metaphysical reality, but rather as a principle of life that compromises all that exists. That there may be lesser deities, whether hundreds or thousands, does not matter. Brahman is a neuter principle through which and by which all of reality is a part, and both is impersonal and personal. So again, much like Kabbalah, you have this impersonal God which is unapproachable, the Ein Sof. In Hinduism, well, there you have it. You have this Brahman, and he's the unapproachable one, you might say. But yet, God is in everything, and we are a part of everything. And then you have this, that's the impersonal side of Hinduism. Then you have the personal side, which we have all of these gods and all of these goddesses. And according to Hinduism, those are the gods and goddesses that you can know, and can know in a very personal way. According to Hinduism, as far as creation goes, the Brahman's work of creation consists of new manifestations of reality. So in essence, really, the world is always evolving, which of course, that's not what the Bible teaches. Our faith is is biblical. Our faith is that God created the heavens and the earth and everything in his creation. He created them in 6 24-hour days, and he rested on the Sabbath day. Now, does the earth change? Well, of course it changes. The climate, of course, changes. Of course, it's going to change because the sun changes. The sun, believe it or not, many people don't know this, the sun actually can get hotter, the sun can get cooler. Well, obviously, if the sun is getting hotter, what do you think is going to happen to the earth? Earth is going to warm up. If the sun is getting cooler, then the earth cools off. So the temperature and earth may change, but earth is not evolving. When God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, he rested on the Sabbath day. There's nothing more to create. All right, well, that's a brief look at really Hinduism and how they view God. Again, impersonal and yet personal. Unknowable and yet knowable. The one that can't be known, but yet all of these other little gods and things like that. Now, as far as Yeshua goes, Jesus Christ. Hinduism would simply say that Jesus Christ was a great teacher. They would go so far as to even call him an avatar. Hinduism teaches that Jesus Christ, of course, existed. He was this wonderful teacher, that he was crucified by the Romans, but that his death did not atone for sin at all. Hinduism also teaches is that when he was crucified, not only was he placed in the tomb, he never resurrected. He did not rise from the dead. Of course, Paul says the complete opposite. Colossians 2, beginning of verse 8. See to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, rather than according to Messiah. For in him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form, and in him you have been made complete, and he is the head over all rule and authority, and in him you were also circumcised, with a circumcision made without hands, in the removal of the body of the flesh by the circumcision of Messiah, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised up with him through faith in the working of God who raised him from the dead. That passage is, of course, in direct contradiction to anything that Hinduism teaches. Just in my studies this week, in preparation for the lesson, it is shocking how many, if you want to call them, Christians are dabbling in Hinduism. And we'll get more into that in the next lesson. But as far as salvation goes, we know that salvation is by faith, by grace through faith in him and his resurrection. But according to Hinduism, salvation is not found in the forgiveness of sins. They would say that salvation is found when you are released eventually from this cycle of reincarnation. You die, you are reincarnated, and then you die, and then you are reincarnated, and then you die, and then you are reincarnated. And it's this almost endless cycle, but it will come to an end eventually, and that's when you will find your salvation. I guess a nirvana, if you will. Once again, the Bible does not teach that. Hebrews 9, verse 27, and inasmuch as it is appointed for men to die once, and after this comes judgment. Well, that's going to conclude this first lesson into Hinduism. In the next lesson, I'm going to address a very popular term that comes straight out of Hinduism, but it has made its way into our English vocabulary, and that word is karma. I'll go ahead and I'll discuss karma in the next lesson. And then we're going to spend some time in that lesson as well. And we're going to talk about something that is really over the past several decades here in the West, and particularly in the United States. We're going to address an exercise which has become very, very popular here. And that, of course, is yoga. Where did yoga come from? What is the purpose of yoga? And I'm going to share with you information, some from their own texts, as far as yoga is concerned. And there are many people, even some Christians, who are going to health clubs and are practicing yoga. They're practicing yoga at home. You see yoga being offered by Fortune 500 companies. You've seen yoga being offered in schools, judo and karate class, and other kinds of sports entertainment and things like that. And it seems as if yoga has now become just normalized here in the United States. I'm going to show you in the next lesson where it came from and really just how dangerous it is. And if you are a believer, you ought to have nothing, absolutely nothing to do with yoga. So that'll be in our next lesson coming up.